You think you're making your own decisions. You believe your preferences, your likes and dislikes, the way you react to people, that it's all you. But what if I told you that many of your decisions were actually installed in your mind long ago? Not by some villain in a lab, but by ordinary people, everyday moments, and subtle psychological conditioning you never even noticed. Here's something disturbing. A study by the University of Minnesota found that by the age of 7, a child has already developed the foundational patterns of their self-worth, not based on truth, but based on how others treated them. And those patterns? They rarely change. That means many adults are walking around with belief systems they never chose. They are being controlled by an invisible psychological trick installed in childhood. You've felt it. The guilt when you say no. The fear of disappointing someone. The urge to please. Ever wondered where that came from? This is the hidden trick that's been shaping your behavior your entire life, without your permission. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. If you're ready to uncover the subtle forces that have been shaping your thoughts since childhood, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. The invisible blueprint. From the moment you're born, your brain isn't just developing, it's absorbing. Absorbing everything. Not just language or motor skills, but emotional patterns, invisible rules, and mental blueprints that begin shaping your entire sense of self. And the wild part? You don't even realize it's happening. You can't. You're too young to question it, so you accept it. Every smile from a parent, every sigh of disappointment, every look of approval or silence of disapproval, it all gets locked into your nervous system like lines of unspoken code. This is how the invisible blueprint begins. Imagine a child who cries for attention. If that cry is met with warmth and comfort, the brain starts building a map that says, "My emotions matter. I'm safe." But if that cry is ignored or punished, the map rewrites, "My emotions are dangerous. I need to stay quiet to be loved." This doesn't just stay in childhood. That same blueprint follows into adulthood, where that same person might now struggle to express their needs in relationships or hide their pain at work, never knowing why they feel so unseen. They were taught to be invisible. Psychologists call this implicit learning, the kind of learning that happens not through lessons or lectures, but through repeated emotional experiences. You don't remember these moments consciously, but they become the foundation of your unconscious beliefs. These are not things you know, these are things you are. And that's what makes them so powerful. They're not optional thoughts you can choose to believe or not believe. They're the psychological floorboards you walk on every day, without even seeing them. Let's take a moment to think about fear. Not the obvious kind, like fear of spiders or heights, but the subtle, manipulative kind, the fear of rejection, the fear of disappointing someone, the fear of not being enough. Where do those come from? For many, it goes back to moments as small as a raised eyebrow, a sarcastic comment, a withheld hug. A child doesn't understand context, they only feel the emotional tone. If love felt conditional, that becomes the script. If I'm not perfect, I won't be loved. Now fast forward 30 years, and that same person is overworking, over-apologizing, overperforming, without ever realizing it's all still being driven by that old script. There's a disturbing psychological phenomenon called attachment imprinting. It suggests that the way your primary caregivers responded to your needs in childhood literally teaches your brain how to expect and accept treatment from others for the rest of your life. This is why some people fall into abusive or neglectful relationships again and again. It's not because they want to suffer. It's because suffering feels familiar. The blueprint was installed early. And unless it's challenged, it keeps running silently in the background, like a virus in your operating system. One study from Harvard tracked individuals over decades and found that early emotional neglect, even mild, was a stronger predictor of adult anxiety and depression than later life events. That's how deep the wiring goes. And it's not always about trauma with a capital T. It can be as subtle as never being praised for effort, only for results. That teaches a person, my worth is in my success. Now you've got someone who's terrified of failure, addicted to achievement, and burnt out, all because of a rule they never consciously chose to live by. Even language plays a role. Think about the difference between hearing, "you made a mistake," versus, "you are a mistake." Children internalize these things deeply. Their brains are still forming, and they don't have the filters adults have. If they hear, even indirectly, that they're too loud, too sensitive, too slow, they begin to become those labels. The brain wires itself to match the feedback it receives. Neurons that fire together, wire together. And once those pathways are built, they don't go away easily. This blueprint doesn't just affect how you see yourself, it affects how you see the world. A child raised with unpredictability learns to anticipate danger, even when it's not there. They become hypervigilant, scanning every room for threats. As adults, they may call themselves just cautious or always prepared, but what they're really doing is managing anxiety that was planted decades earlier. Their brain learned the world isn't safe, and it never got the update that things have changed. Now here's the really twisted part: the brain protects these blueprints, even when they're harmful. It does this because familiarity feels safe, even if it's dysfunctional. In psychology, this is known as confirmation bias. You unconsciously seek out experiences that confirm what you already believe, even if those beliefs are sabotaging you. So if you grew up believing you weren't good enough, your brain will ignore compliments, downplay successes, and focus only on criticisms. That's not self-esteem, that's early programming, still in control. None of this is your fault. That's the first step. But it is your responsibility once you become aware of it. These psychological tricks, the invisible blueprint, they were installed when you were defenseless. But now? Now you have the power to see them for what they are. And only then can you begin to break free. Because you're not broken. Your pattern. And every pattern, no matter how deep, can be rewired, if you're willing to see it clearly. The mirror trick: how others shape your identity. Imagine this: you're standing in front of a mirror, but instead of your reflection, you see 1,000 fragmented images, each one shaped not by how you see yourself, but by how others have seen you. Welcome to the psychological mirror of childhood. We don't build our identity alone. We construct it through the reflections we receive, the subtle smiles, the raised eyebrows, the tone of a voice when we ask a question. It's these early social interactions that teach us who we are, or at least, who we think we are. From our earliest years, we rely on caregivers, teachers, siblings, even strangers, to tell us who we are. And they do. Not always directly, but constantly. You're such a good girl. You're always causing trouble. Why can't you be more like your brother? These words might seem simple, even forgettable, but to a child's brain, still fragile, still wiring itself, they become truths. Not opinions. Truths. So if a child hears they're too sensitive enough times, they stop crying, not because they don't feel hurt, but because they've learned their feelings are wrong. If they're called difficult, they may internalize shame, constantly second-guessing their own needs. This is what psychologists call the looking-glass self, the idea that we shape our identity based on how others perceive us. The mind takes what it sees in others' reactions and turns it into a self-image. And it happens so early, so frequently, that we forget we ever had a mirror of our own. We stop asking, "What do I believe about myself?" and start asking, "What do others want me to be?" And over time, we forget we are even asking. Let's go deeper. Picture a child who is praised only when they're quiet, obedient, and calm. That child quickly learns that being loud, messy, or emotional results in withdrawal or scolding. So they shrink. They compress their personality into the version that gets rewarded. But here's the kicker: as an adult, that same person may struggle with self-expression, constantly censoring their words or hesitating before they speak. They're not shy by nature. They were trained to survive by staying small. In one haunting case study, a woman in her late 30s described how she always felt invisible in relationships. She didn't speak up, didn't share her opinions, avoided conflict at all costs. Through therapy, she traced this back to childhood dinners, where every time she expressed a different opinion from her father, she was either mocked or ignored. So she adapted. She became agreeable. And decades later, that survival tactic became a cage. Her entire adult personality was shaped not by choice, but by reaction. That's the mirror trick. You're not looking at yourself, you're reacting to what others reflected back. And it's not just the bad reflections that cause damage. Overpraise and inflated labels can distort identity too. A child constantly told they're the smart one or the golden child may grow up terrified of failure. Why? Because their self-worth has been pinned to a performance. The moment they fall short, their entire identity feels like it's collapsing. The reflection shatters. And in that space, anxiety takes root. Think about how you behave when you're in different social groups. Around your family, you might play the role of caretaker or peacekeeper. With friends, maybe you're the entertainer. At work, maybe you're reserved, overly polite, maybe even invisible. These roles aren't random, they're scripts you were handed early on. You learn what kept you safe, what got approval, what helped you belong. And so, over time, you adapted. You built a self that mirrored what was rewarded. But the real danger is this: when your identity is built on mirrors, your self-worth becomes fragile. Because mirrors can break. People change. Approval fades. And suddenly, the person who spent a lifetime seeking validation starts to feel lost. Who am I when no one is watching? Who am I when I'm not being praised or needed or admired? There's also a darker edge to this mirror dynamic: social gaslighting. When you're repeatedly told that your feelings aren't valid, that you're overreacting, or that what you experienced didn't happen the way you remember, your internal mirror cracks. You stop trusting your own perception. You begin outsourcing your reality to others. This is especially damaging in childhood, when you're forming not only your identity but also your ability to trust yourself. People raised in gaslighting environments often struggle with chronic self-doubt as adults. They second-guess their instincts. They apologize for things that weren't their fault. Not because they're weak, but because they were taught not to trust their own reflection. What makes this even more complicated is that people don't do this to you out of malice. Often, they're just repeating what was done to them. Parents who withheld affection may have learned love was a transaction. Teachers who humiliated students may have been humiliated themselves. The distortions in your mirror often come from people whose own mirrors were shattered long ago. That doesn't excuse it, but it helps explain why so many of us are walking around with broken images of ourselves. And here's where things get even more unnerving: once you've built a self-image around how others see you, you begin to protect it, even if it hurts you. This is called ego attachment. If your identity is the helpful one, you might feel panic if someone sees you as selfish. If your identity is the strong one, You may hide your depression, bury your pain, pretend you're fine, all to preserve the image others expect from you. The mirror trick doesn't just shape you, it traps you. But here's what no one tells you: you don't have to keep living by those reflections. Your identity isn't static. You're not obligated to play a role someone else assigned to you decades ago. The first step is noticing when you're acting from reflection instead of authenticity. Is this belief really mine? Or is it someone else's voice I internalized? Do I want to be this way, or did I learn I had to be this way? You are not your mirror. You are the person behind it. And once you realize that, you can start to rebuild yourself from the inside out, not based on praise, not based on punishment, but based on truth. Reward and punishment conditioning. Every child learns quickly what earns a smile, and what earns silence. It starts subtly: a clap when you share your toy, a scolding when you raise your voice. These aren't just moments, they're messages. And your brain, like a sponge, soaks them in. Over time, your nervous system learns a simple rule: certain behaviors bring reward, others bring punishment. What seems like basic parenting or education is actually the beginning of deep-rooted psychological conditioning. And long after childhood ends, those reward and punishment patterns keep playing in the background, shaping how you think, what you pursue, and what you avoid. Think about it. As children, we are praised for obedience, not curiosity. We are rewarded for sitting still, not asking too many questions. We are punished for talking back, even if we are speaking truth. So what happens? We learn compliance. We learn to prioritize being good over being authentic. The real tragedy is that this conditioning often doesn't come from cruelty, it comes from control masked as care. It's not always what was done to you, it's what your brain learned about how the world works. Be small, be quiet, be agreeable, and you'll be safe. Now bring this forward into adulthood. Why do so many people feel uncomfortable saying no? Why do some panic when they disappoint someone? Why do others constantly chase approval, overwork themselves, or settle for less? These aren't random behaviors. These are conditioned responses to an early reward system that taught them their value lies in compliance, productivity, or people-pleasing. Not in simply being. There's a concept in behavioral psychology called operant conditioning, coined by B.F. Skinner, which explains how behavior is shaped by reinforcement. In simple terms, if a behavior is rewarded, it gets repeated. If it's punished, it gets suppressed. This works great for training pets, but when applied to human development, it creates a dangerous oversimplification: do what others like equals good, do what others disapprove of equals bad. And when the people administering those rewards and punishments are parents, teachers, or peers, the stakes feel life or death. Because for a child, approval is survival. Here's where it gets darker. Punishment doesn't have to be violent to be powerful. A sigh, a cold shoulder, a sarcastic comment, even a delayed response, these microsignals trigger a deep sense of rejection. The child doesn't rationalize it, they internalize it. And when that kind of psychological punishment is paired with love or affection being withheld, the brain creates a terrifying link: if I express this part of myself, I lose love. That's how a person begins editing themselves, not for morality, but for survival. And reward. That has its own hidden cost. Let's say a child is praised only when they win, not when they try. They learn, I matter when I succeed. Later, that person may obsess over achievement, constantly pushing themselves, terrified of failure, not because they're ambitious, but because they believe their worth is conditional. And if they don't win, they feel worthless. This is how reward, when misused, becomes just another form of psychological control. What's really disturbing is how these early patterns get baked into our emotional responses. You may flinch at criticism not because it's harsh, but because your body remembers how rejection felt when you were 6. You might over-apologize because your nervous system learned, over years, that apologies are the safest route back to connection. You might panic when you're not productive because your reward system trained you to associate rest with guilt. These reactions feel like personality traits, but they are really echoes of a childhood behavioral economy, where emotional currency was earned, not given. Consider this: were you ever told good job for staying quiet, even if something felt wrong? Were you ever punished for expressing anger, so you learned to smile instead, even when you were hurt? Were you rewarded for being the strong one, the responsible one, the one who didn't cause problems, so you learned to suppress your needs to keep the peace? These are not compliments. These are behavioral contracts. Unspoken agreements that taught you, don't feel too much, don't need too much, and definitely don't make others uncomfortable. One study from Stanford University found that children exposed to conditional affection, where love is given based on behavior, were more likely to experience anxiety, guilt, and a distorted sense of identity as adults. Why? Because they never learned to separate their value from their performance. Love became something to be earned, not something they believed they inherently deserved. Now think about how this plays out in adult relationships. Ever feel paralyzed when someone's disappointed in you? Ever keep the peace just to avoid tension, even when you're hurting inside? That's your old reward and punishment system flaring up, still trying to keep you safe. You learned that disapproval equals danger, and now you avoid it like your life depends on it. Because to your nervous system, it kind of does. Even societal systems reinforce this. We reward hustle, productivity, popularity, and we punish failure, softness, rest. We call it motivation, but much of it is fear-based compliance. You push yourself because stopping feels dangerous. Not because you love what you do, but because somewhere deep inside, the child in you still thinks, if I stop, I'll be nothing. But here's the shift: once you recognize this conditioning, you can begin to question it. Whose approval are you chasing? Who taught you that love is something you have to earn? Why do you feel guilty resting? These are not rhetorical questions, they're doorways out of the loop. You are not a lab rat. You are not a machine made to respond to praise and punishment. You are a human being, and your value is not negotiable. It was never meant to be based on performance or perfection. The most radical act you can take is to start rewiring your reward system, to offer yourself the kindness, the rest, the unconditional support you were taught had to be earned. To give yourself permission to be full, messy, real, without waiting for someone else to approve. Because you're not here to be a product of conditioning. You're here to break it. The guilt loop: why you can't say no. There's a specific kind of tension you feel when you're about to say no, not to something huge, but something small. A favor you don't want to do. A plan you're not comfortable with. A message you don't want to answer. Your lips tighten. Your heart rate spikes just a bit. And then, almost automatically, you say yes. Later, you wonder why. You weren't forced. You could have said no. So why didn't you? The answer lies in something far deeper than politeness. It's not about boundaries. It's about guilt, and the invisible psychological trap that was laid for you long before you learned the word no. Guilt is a survival emotion. It keeps social bonds intact. In healthy doses, it makes us more empathetic, more human. But when it's weaponized, when it's planted in a child's emotional soil, it grows into something corrosive. Something that doesn't protect connection but poisons it. And most people are carrying guilt not because they've done something wrong, but because they were taught to feel bad for simply having needs. From the earliest moments, guilt can be implanted like a seed. A child says no to hugging a relative and hears, "Don't be rude." They cry and are told, "Stop making a scene." They express anger and are punished with silence. The child learns, "My emotions hurt people. My needs make me a burden. My boundaries disappoint others." So they do what all smart children do, they adapt. They apologize for crying. They smile when uncomfortable. They learn that it's safer to abandon themselves than to risk being seen as selfish. This is how the guilt loop starts. It's not a feeling, it's a program. And it runs silently in the background of every decision that involves another person. You want to rest, but you feel like you should help. You want to leave, but you feel like you should stay. You want to speak up, but you feel like you ruin everything. So you betray yourself, again and again, and call it kindness. The scary part? Most of this guilt isn't even yours. It was given to you. Transferred. Inherited. Parents who themselves never had emotional freedom may unknowingly pass on guilt through manipulation masked as morality. "After everything I've done for you, you're breaking my heart. You used to be such a good child." These aren't just words, they are emotional levers. And when they're used consistently, they train a person to associate self-protection with harm. To say no becomes not just difficult, it feels dangerous. Think about how guilt shows up in your body. That tightness in your chest when you disappoint someone. The heat in your face when you express a need. The stomach drop when you finally set a boundary. That's not weakness, that's conditioning. Your nervous system learned long ago that upsetting others meant disconnection, rejection, even emotional exile. And the body remembers. In psychology, this loop is often tied to fawn response, one of the lesser-known trauma responses alongside fight, flight, and freeze. Fawning is what happens when a person copes with threat by appeasing others. They go into over-agreement mode, people-pleasing, caretaking, apologizing excessively. Not because they're nice, but because they've learned that staying connected means staying agreeable. They fear conflict not because it's uncomfortable, but because it feels like annihilation. Let's bring this into real life. Ever found yourself doing something you didn't want to do, attending a gathering, lending money, listening to someone vent for hours, and afterward you felt drained, even resentful? But then came the guilt. They needed me. I don't want to be selfish. That's the loop. Guilt, compliance, resentment, repeat. Over time, it erodes your sense of autonomy. You stop trusting yourself. You assume that discomfort means you've done something wrong. That's not guilt talking, that's years of emotional training. In one case study, a man named Eric described how he constantly felt responsible for everyone's happiness. If someone was upset around him, he immediately took blame. If someone asked for help, he couldn't say no, even if it damaged his own life. Through therapy, he traced this back to a childhood dynamic where his mother frequently used guilt to control behavior. "If you really love me, you'd help. You're making me sick with your behavior." These statements trained him to believe that love and obligation were the same thing. That unless he sacrificed himself, he wasn't worthy of connection. And here's the darkest part, guilt can become addictive. When you live in the guilt loop long enough, guilt becomes familiar. It gives you a false sense of moral safety. You feel like a good person because you're suffering. You confuse martyrdom with virtue. And even when you begin to question it, your brain will resist. It will whisper, "You're being selfish. You regret this. You're not being fair. These voices are echoes, not of your soul, but of your conditioning. So what's the way out? It starts with this truth: you are allowed to disappoint people. Let that land. You are allowed to say no. To choose rest. To walk away. To prioritize yourself. And you're allowed to do it without explaining, justifying, or apologizing. Because guilt is not a compass, it's a signal that someone else's values have been imposed on your boundaries. Healing the guilt loop isn't about becoming cold or unkind. It's about reclaiming emotional balance. Healthy people respect your no. People who benefit from your guilt won't. That's not a reflection of your character, that's a test of theirs. It's also about learning to tolerate the discomfort that comes with freedom. Saying no might make your heart race. Setting a boundary might make you feel sick. That's okay. That's your nervous system unlearning years of survival programming. You're not doing something wrong, you're doing something new. You don't owe your peace to anyone who demands it at the cost of your sanity. And you don't have to bleed emotionally to prove your love. Break the loop. Rewrite the rule. Because you were never meant to carry guilt for simply existing. Breaking the spell. How to rewire your mind. By now, you've probably felt it, that quiet discomfort in your chest. That strange mix of anger, sadness, and clarity. The realization that so much of who you've been was never really you. It was a pattern. A script. A set of invisible rules written by someone else, maybe even generations before you. And the scariest part? It's been running the show for years. But awareness changes everything. Once you see the pattern, you're no longer just a character in the play, you're the one holding the pen. Now comes the most important part, breaking the spell. Rewiring the mind sounds dramatic, but it's not some sci-fi fantasy. It's what your brain is built for. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, isn't just a buzzword. It's the reason people recover from trauma, escape addiction, and transform their lives. But here's the catch: the brain doesn't change through information alone. It changes through experience. Repeated, intentional, emotionally powerful experience. So understanding your psychological blueprint isn't enough. You have to live differently, one small, scary, liberating step at a time. Let's start with the simplest and hardest part: awareness. You can't change what you won't name. That voice in your head that says, "Don't make a scene, you're being selfish, just make them happy." That's not you. That's programming. The first step is learning to hear it. Name it. Observe it. You don't need to fight it, just don't obey it automatically. Create space between stimulus and response. Between guilt and action. Between fear and compliance. That space is where freedom begins. Next comes pattern interruption. The brain loves routine, even painful ones, because they feel safe. That's why change feels so uncomfortable at first. Saying no when you're used to saying yes will make your heart pound. Speaking your truth when you've been silent will feel like breaking a law. But you're not breaking anything, you're building something. Every time you act differently than the old pattern, even if you do it clumsily, your brain starts taking notes. It begins to realize, we don't have to live like that anymore. But it's not enough to stop the old behaviors, you have to install new ones. Think of it like updating a corrupt operating system. If guilt used to drive your kindness, now you practice kindness from a place of freedom. If people-pleasing used to earn love, now you risk being disliked to be authentic. If you were taught that rest equals laziness, you deliberately rest, and protect that rest like it's sacred. Because it is. You're not just changing habits, you're reclaiming your nervous system. This process isn't linear. You will slip back into old roles. You'll say yes when you mean no. You'll apologize for taking up space. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you're human. The goal isn't perfection. It's awareness. It's noticing faster, recovering quicker, choosing differently more often. Every time you return to yourself, without shame, you weaken the spell. Another powerful tool in this rewiring process? Language. The words you use shape the way your brain processes reality. So stop calling your boundaries selfish. Stop calling your needs too much. Stop minimizing your pain. Use language that reflects truth, not trauma. I'm allowed to rest. It's okay to disappoint others. My emotions matter. Say these things out loud. Write them down. Repeat them, not like affirmations you don't believe, but like truths you're daring to practice. Because repetition creates new neural pathways. And that's not just theory, that's biology. You'll also need to grieve. That's something people forget to mention. When you start waking up from psychological conditioning, you often feel a wave of sadness. Not just for what happened, but for all the time lost living someone else's story. That grief is real. And necessary. It's the emotional detox your system needs before it can fully step into something new. Don't rush through it. Let yourself feel it. You're not weak for grieving the version of you that coped. You're honoring them, and gently letting them go. And remember this, not everyone will like the new you. That's part of the process. Some people are invested in the roles you used to play, the always available one, the fixer, the good child, the emotional sponge. When you stop performing, they may push back. They may guilt you, withdraw, question your change. That's okay. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. You're not changing to become someone new. You're returning to who you were before the world told you who to be. You may also find new people, ones who respond not to your compliance, but to your truth. People who respect your no, who don't make you prove your worth, who don't see your boundaries as betrayal. These are your mirrors now. Not because they complete you, but because they reflect the self you're finally starting to recognize. And in quiet moments, when no one's watching, you notice the spell weakening. You'll say no and not panic. You rest and not justify. You'll speak up and not collapse. Not because it's easy, but because you're learning. You're practicing. You're rewiring. Slowly, gently, powerfully. This is the real psychology of healing. Not just awareness, but action. Not just learning facts, but reclaiming your voice. And not just escaping your past, but rewriting your future. One choice at a time. You don't owe anyone the version of yourself that kept you safe. You owe yourself the version that sets you free. The spell is breaking. And you're the one breaking it.